Good morning, everyone. Hello. My name is Maria Aschenbrenner, and I'm one half of the adult programs team here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And I am so happy that you all have decided to join us this morning on a lovely, brisk Monday morning here at the museum. I want to give you a little bit of context as to why we have programs in the morning right now, and it came from an ask of all of you guys. Some of you guys email adult and families and go, hey, I'm an older adult and I don't like driving at night. Can you please put a program in the morning? Or a parent who goes, hey, I have itty bitties that I put to bed at 7 p.m. All of your events start at 7 p.m. Any chance there's a Monday morning program or a morning program? And I said yes. So here we are. We are currently prototyping this series, so any feedback is so appreciated right now. You can find me after the event as you exit. And I just wanted to let you know as well that we have 2 more in the next month coming up. Next, in 2 weeks, on November 6th, we're going to be talking about spiders in space, which I did not know that we sent spiders to space. And when Dr. Paula Cushing emailed me and said, can I talk about this? I immediately said, you're already on the website. I am so excited to talk about spiders in space. So that is next November 6th, which is in 2 Thursdays from this coming Thursday. And then November 20th, we will also be having another morning lecture that is going to be talking about tattooing our collections. Why is tattooing important in a science museum? You're gonna find out with the pioneer, Dr. Sierra Swenson. Don't know if she's a doctor. I'm gonna still say Dr. Sierra Swenson, because if she's not, she's in the path to get one. And that's very exciting for our museum too, because it has helped catalog our collections, and I would love for you guys to all hear about it as well. There are 2 things with this event that I would like to tell you about. Number 1, our Dr. Gussie Maccracken is feeling a bit under the weather. She is not contagious, but unfortunately we will not be encouraging you to come up after the event to talk to her. During Q&A, which will happen in this event, we'll have a mic that I'll pass around for you guys for accessibility, for everyone to hear, but I do strongly encourage you all to not come up to Dr. Gussie Maccracken, because I want you all to stay safe. And again, she is not contagious. I just want you all to be very safe. Secondly, I would also like to let you know that general admission is included in these programs when you come to this morning event. To also let you know general admission is included because technically you're here before the museum is open and the program started before the museum opened, which allows you all to be here. So you guys can exit through Space Odyssey and then through the north, or you can take a minute to walk around the museum and take a breather if you would like. But that's the main goal of what you guys are all here for. I would like to introduce Dr. Gussie Maccracken, our Curator of Paleobotany.
All right. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Excellent. How are we all doing today? Good. Some of us had our coffee. Well, thank you all for coming on this Monday morning. I appreciate you all attending today, and we're going to hear about an exciting story on the invisible, the unseen Paleobotanical war that is going on all around us at this very moment. I hope, in fact, you are able to have coffee today, or tea, or something like that, because it'll be very on brand. We're going to be thinking about all of these things in our daily lives that actually are a result of hundreds of millions of years of coevolution between plants and insects, and how that's kind of shaped the world we live in today. So as Maria said, I have been blessed with pneumonia, but I have been on antibiotics, so I am no longer contagious. So I just wanted to really stress that to everybody, because I know we're all very health conscious these days. So if anything, I'm going to apologize right now for kind of a weird voice and maybe some coughing. So I'm very sorry about that, but you'll have to live with it, I guess. And in fact, if I say anything truly weird, I promise it's the drugs talking. Okay, so today's topic, I didn't want it to do that. There we go. It's something that I've been thinking about on and off for over a decade. It's because I'm a paleontologist who studies plant and insect associations in the fossil record, and specifically thinking about how insects chewing on plants has changed through time and how these two lineages have evolved. But I think of it in terms of the damage that insects leave behind on fossil leaves. And while this talk is only going to briefly touch on insect damage, that's sort of how I got into this field and how I got into thinking about this sort of unseen war in paleobotany. So the way I see the world is essentially kind of an unassuming one. So I see the world as insects taking little bites of plants. But given the extreme diversity of insects and plants today, and that diversity in deep time, as well as the hundreds of millions of years that they've been around, you can start to scale up these little tiny interactions that we barely think about unless we're maybe in our gardens and getting kind of irritated at all the chew marks in our beautiful roses and vegetables and things like that. But I like to think about how these interactions have really scaled up through time and how important they are in driving ecology, in driving things in our ecosystems today, and in fact, in our human lives. So let's dive in. Excuse me. All right, so if we think about the diversity of life on Earth today, we really live in a world dominated by insects. There are over 1 million described insects today. That number is then followed by land plants, which have about 375,000 described species, and then all of these other kinds of organisms like fungi and the chordates, which are the things with backbones, which is what we are. They really pale in comparison to the diversity of plants and insects. And in fact, about half of all insects are herbivores. So if you think about the sheer volume of ecological interactions, that's about half of life on Earth interacting with each other, those herbivorous insects and the land plants. We can also think about the Earth we live on today in terms of biomass, or the weight of life on Earth. And so plants make about 450 gigatons of biomass today. That's about 81% of all biomass on Earth. So just the sheer weight of plants is really the dominant driving force on Earth today. There are about 550 total gigatons. So that's everything else from fungus to animals, even including those insects. And insects consume up to 18% of global biomass, global vegetation each year. So that is a total of 81 gigatons of consumed plant material each year. And those plants are then regrowing that biomass, and those insects are just continuing to eat it. And so this is sort of a different way to think about just the sheer impact of insects eating plants. And it's been happening for a really long time. So the first evidence of insect herbivory goes back to about 417 million years ago in the Devonian period, when the Earth's surface would have looked something like this. So these are all little plants called Cooksonia. They're some of the earliest land plants that we know of from the fossil record. They are just a few inches tall. This is really a carpeting of plants in these early kind of landscapes on Earth. And here we have some evidence of the earliest insect herbivory on plants. So on the left-hand side, we have an image of coprolites, insect coprolites. That's frass, or to most of us, that's poop, insect poop, that has spores inside of it. So that's direct evidence that insects are now eating plants, because when when plants and insects evolved, they weren't necessarily interacting like from day one. It took a little bit of time. By about 410 million years, we have evidence of insects eating stems. So we actually have the evidence of herbivory on the plant itself. And because geologic time is not something that like I even grasp very well, I don't expect any of you to really grasp it. I mean, in reality, our puny little human brains cannot understand geologic time. It is just beyond our comprehension. But I wanted to kind of walk us quickly through what geologic time looks like, just to give you an idea of where we are now and sort of when multicellular life became popular. So, just starting off, oh, excuse me. Remember, we have that 417 million year old evidence of insect herbivory in the Devonian. Okay, let's go back to present day. This is a human. This is actually my little human who got me sick, which led to pneumonia, so, but she's toddling around feeling fine right now. Good for her. So then we go back a little bit further in time. We have mammoths evolving 6 million years ago. So, back in the Ice Age feels like forever ago, right? Because hundreds and hundreds of lives have, not human lives. We haven't been around that long, but, 6 million feels like a long time ago. But not to me, because I think about time in much deeper intervals. So we have the extinction of the dinosaurs at 66 million years ago. Again, pretty close to us, right? In fact, there's a great little factoid that you can give at your next Halloween party, and it's that we live closer in time to T-Rex, which died at the Cretaceous Paleogene mass extinction 66 million years ago. So we live closer in time to T-Rex than T-Rex lived to Stegosaur, to the Stegosaurus, which is our state fossil. So that just kind of gives you another way to think about how deep time really, really is. Now, because I'm a paleobotanist, I wanted to put up here when we get the first evidence of flowering plants evolving. So that's about 136 million years old when we get those first angiosperm or flowering plant pollen grains in the fossil record. Dinosaurs evolve sometime around 230 million years, give or take. We have the Carboniferous coal swamps, which ended up creating some of the big coal deposits that we have on the Earth today. And this is the time when you get those big scale trees and the dragonflies with the 2-foot wide wingspans. And again, we have our earliest evidence of insect herbivory at 417. We get plants and insects actually evolving about the same time. So sometime around 480 million years ago in the Ordovician, we get our first plants and insects evolving. And then we get the explosion of complex life known as the Cambrian explosion happening about 538 million years ago. And so that's just to kind of give you an idea of where we're sitting in time and how long plants and insects have been battling, not wanting to be eaten and insects wanting to eat. Okay, so we're going to jump into a little bit of evolutionary and ecological theory. Starting off, we're going to think about natural selection. So Charles Darwin in The Origin of Species said, it may be said that natural selection is daily and hourly scrutinizing throughout the world every variation, even the slightest, rejecting that which is bad, preserving and adding up all that is good, silently and insensibly working whenever and wherever opportunity offers at the improvement of each organic being in relation to its organic and inorganic conditions of life. So, we're experiencing natural selection. And you've all heard, the fittest organisms survive, right? So what what's really meant by the fitness of organisms for natural selection is not that you're actually like really strong and really buff. It's that you reproduce. And so what natural selection is, just sort of kind of at its shortest definition, would be something like the animals that are best adapted to, the organisms, humans, we just all love our animals, right? The organisms that are best adapted to their particular environments, to their particular landscapes, have advantages. And those advantages can help them survive long enough to reproduce. And we pass on our genes during that reproduction. And so fitness is actually just your reproduction. It's the things that are best adapted to their current environments, reproduce, and pass on those genes that are still best adapted. But we've come a long way since Darwin, and so we now know that there are many things that influence evolution of life. Today we're going to be mostly thinking about natural selection, but also mutations. So that's random changes in DNA. Mutation can do a few things. It can create a whole new structure or something entirely new. Oftentimes it just kind of adds to something that's already there. So we'll get into that in a little bit. We also have gene flow and genetic drift, which I'm not going to go into today. But there are a bunch of ways in which we now know that evolution occurs, kind of the forces of evolution. And this ties into now the darker side of plants and insects, that war that's been waging for, now we know, 400 and at least 17 million years. And so you're going to have to forgive me. In my drug-induced cough medicine stupor, I went down the AI rabbit hole, and just bear with me. It's also Halloween, so I was like, make it spooky. So we think of insects eating plants, kind of cute, really? No. It's a war of toxins, it's a war of chemicals, and it's a war of counter-adaptations and coevolution. So when I say coevolution, I mean the reciprocal evolutionary influence between interacting plant and insect species. So they are the interactions that plants and insects have on one another are kind of pushing evolution forward in these two groups. So these evolutionary adaptations of plants and insects are in response to each other's strategies and the development of specialized traits that benefit one party while imposing selective pressures on the other, such as chemical compounds to deter herbivores, while insects may develop mechanisms to detoxify or circumvent these chemicals. So what this is known as is the coevolutionary arms race, where plants are producing toxins and insects are trying to circumnavigate those toxins so that they can eat. It's don't eat me and I need to eat to survive kind of a battle. And the name of the coevolutionary arms race comes from the Cold War. The Cold War nuclear arms race between the US and the USSR, and how every time we are coming up with a new and worse and nastier weapon of mass destruction, the other side feels that it needs to come up with something to counteract that, to surpass that, and that's how you get this escalation of nuclear warheads. But the plant-insect coevolutionary arms race is, in some ways, I mean, obviously less deadly. You know, plants and insects aren't going to kill us 100 times over. But it's a little bit more insidious in some ways. It's a little bit more interesting. So the coevolutionary arms race is the ongoing battle between plant defenses, those toxins, those poisons, and the insect adaptations that lead to continuously evolving strategies to outcompete the other side. And this dynamic process contributes to the diversity of both plant defense mechanisms and insect feeding strategies. So what do plants do? Well, they can make physical defenses, so things like thorns, trichomes, which are hairs on leaves, sometimes even teeth, glandular teeth along the edge of the leaf, and toughened tissues. These are all things that plants will do to protect themselves. And depending on the scale of these defenses, some of the largest thorns might be to protect a plant like an acacia from a giraffe. But at smaller scales, if you're a soft-bodied caterpillar, you should need to stay away from that thorn because you can actually puncture your body and die. Same thing with trichomes. They can actually have little hooks that are pretty nasty. When you're the size of a tiny little insect, these are no joke. But they also tend to be somewhat easy to kind of get around. Maybe you have a really tough exoskeleton, maybe you have really tough mandibles if you're an insect for eating. So the physical defenses are sort of a nice first step, but really the heart of this coevolutionary arms race for plants is the chemical defenses. So these are toxins, these are alkaloids, tannins, poisons that affect your nervous system, all these really, really nasty compounds that are aimed to kill insects. And then plants can also do something really interesting too. They can actually have induced defenses, not just producing these nasty chemicals when the plant is being eaten. So the plant will sense that it's being eaten and release extra chemicals, which is great for the plant because it doesn't have to have them in production all the time. It can kind of produce them on the spot and save its energy. Excuse me. They can also release volatile chemicals into the air that attract the predators of insect herbivores. So a lot of like wasps, little wasps, are actually predators and parasitoids of insects like caterpillars. And so the plant can actually like call in help to bring a predator to the insect that's eating it, which is pretty wild. And again, this is mammals, this is not necessarily insects, but it does happen for insects too. But if a plant can release the volatile chemicals, sometimes it'll actually, wherever that chemical lands on other plants of the same species or sometimes related species, it can signal to those plants to start producing more chemicals. And so in Africa, you can actually see giraffes eating acacia and walking upwind because the acacia is releasing a volatile chemical signaling to the other acacia that like, help, there's an herbivore, make your leaves really nasty, make them very bitter. And so the giraffes have then learned that they have to walk upwind in order to avoid those volatile chemicals. So, all this goes to say is plants are not just sitting around looking beautiful in our gardens and just, you're not frolicking through the woods. They're actually waging these really complex, really interesting battles against not being eaten. And against each other. They use chemicals to sort of poison the ground. Some of them poison the ground around where they're growing to keep out other plants. So it's really, this war of chemicals is really, really an interesting thing. Now, insect counter adaptations. This mostly comes in detoxifying in their guts. And so they can eat a toxin and they can produce enzymes or other chemicals in their digestive systems that allow them to survive and maybe neutralize that toxin and expel it. But they also have behavioral adaptations. So maybe if a plant is starting to become too toxic, they'll shift to another plant. So insects aren't just out there eating whatever plant comes along, plants don't really move. So what other plant is in their path, I guess I should say. They have these close ties to the plants that they're eating. Some insects, like grasshoppers, are what we call generalists. So they're eating kind of most things that they come across. Some are specialists, and they might only eat one species of plant. And so, if you're eating one species of plant and all of a sudden it's just like getting a little bit too spicy for you, too toxic, you might have to make that jump to a new host plant or perish. There's another really cool thing that insects will do, and that is avoiding parts of the plant that are known to be toxic. So one of the studies that my colleagues, Tori McCoy, did recently in the fossil record was find latex sabotaging. So latex is that white sticky substance that some plants produce. It is a toxin cardiac toxin to insects and most animals. And so what some insects have learned to do is to actually just cut the veins that are transporting latex, and so that they can eat the rest of that leaf, and the latex is just dripping out, and the rest of the leaf that they want to eat is latex-free or mostly latex-free. And they've actually found that in the fossil record, which I think is pretty cool. This is about 40 million years old from Germany. And then another thing that insects are great at doing is the sequestration of toxins. And so they can actually ingest a toxic plant, take that poison, kind of package it up, and maybe move it to another part of their body to store it, because now they are protected by that same toxin that the plant is protected by. This is a really common thing for monarchs, the caterpillars and the butterflies, and milkweeds. So milkweeds produce cardiac glycosides that will give you a heart attack if you eat milkweed or too much milkweed. And the caterpillars actually will sequester those toxins and store those toxins, and it will last into the adult form, into the butterfly, which is why monarchs are poisonous for birds to eat. Oftentimes birds will eat one monarch butterfly, vomit it up, and hopefully learn not to eat anymore. So what does coevolutionary arms race look like? It starts with a mutation on the plant side. And so say this plant has now evolved either a new type of chemical defense, or maybe it's just heightened its chemical defense via mutation. Maybe it's doubled it or something great like that. And now the insects that usually feed on this plant have died. They do not do well with this new mutated toxin. Also, I want to say, I use some AI, and just like with human fingers, like AI gives us all like 10 fingers, right? They do the same freaking thing with insects. So ignore all the extra legs. I'm a little embarrassed. They're like eight-legged insects here, but that's okay. But let's say that over time, maybe an insect has its own mutation, or just through the variability in the genes that are in this insect population, one insect or a few insects are just better at dealing with this toxin, and they survive. And now they can eat this plant, which has benefited from not having any herbivores on it. It's just been extra healthy, done its thing for a few generations, but now it has an insect that once again can eat it. And what happens is that insect will then reproduce, because remember, natural selection, we have that increased fitness. We have its ability to eat a great plant, a great food source, and maybe it's just doing a little bit better than the other insects in its own species, and it's reproducing more, and this its genetic makeup is being selected for. And so now we have a community of insects that's kind of, or a species of insects that's kind of coming back and eating this plant again. And what has to happen next is the insect then the plant has to kind of one-up that insect. And maybe it has another mutation, or some of the variability in that plant population just has a little bit extra of that toxin, that poison. And so it's just this continuously escalating toxin profile and ability to consume that toxin by the insects. This is really what leads to a huge diversity of plants and insects today. So we think that the coevolutionary arms race of plants and insects has led to the biodiversity of the two groups today, because if you are a plant that is no longer being eaten by a lot of insects, maybe that is your moment where you've broken off from the species that you once were, and now you're a different species, and you're doing really well. And the same thing with the insects that have developed these counter adaptations. You know, that counter adaptation might mean that now you're becoming your own new species as well. And so it's these radiations of defenses, counter defenses, and then what we call enemy-free spaces for the plants, where you don't have your herbivore kind of putting all that pressure on you. That allows you to become new species. And for the insects, it's, you know, all of a sudden now you're in a little pocket of better adapted or differently adapted insects that might start moving off and just reproducing with yourselves and doing your own thing. So again, this diversity is not just something that happened because plants are great and insects are great. You know, it's partly because of the battle that's been going on for over 400 million years. And now I have to say, this is an antagonistic interaction. Plants and insects also have mutualisms, like pollination, seed dispersal, things like that. And so there's good and bad, right? And maybe good and bad is a human construct. But there's negative and positive in the interactions between plants and insects that have led to increased diversity, because pollination has also led to the diversity of both of these groups. It's these just very tight coevolutionary relationships that have meant that insects and plants really do dominate the world and have done so for hundreds of millions of years. Okay, so now we're kind of shifting gears. We've thought about plants and insects on Earth today. We've thought about some ecological evolutionary theory and the coevolutionary arms race. And now let's think about the toxins and chemicals in our world that we interact with. So have you guys heard the phrase, the dose makes the poison? Dosis sola facit venium. So this actually comes from a Swiss physician in the 16th century, Paracelsus, who said, "All things are poison and nothing is without poison. The dosage alone makes it so. A thing is not a poison." But today we really just say that the dose makes the poison, and this is so true for humans versus plants. Because if you think about coffee, it's really about the dosage. So if you're an insect, you're many, many, many times smaller than a human. And so just taking a few bites of a coffee bean, a seed, or a leaf from the coffee plant might get you a lethal dose of caffeine. But it takes a lot more to kill a human. So we actually have co-opted the caffeine in coffee, tea, in chocolate, and it helps give us that like nice morning pickup, because it's a neurotoxin, right? It affects our central nervous system. And so It's really about the dosage. But don't be fooled. You can drink too much coffee and die. In grad school, I feel like I got right up to that many times. Depending on the strength of your coffee, it's somewhere between 30 or 40 cups, and some say 70 to 100 cups of coffee. Please don't drink that much coffee. This is not me telling you to try this. You do not overdose on caffeine. But it really is just about that dose. So if you could give insects just a little bit of caffeine, maybe you would do wonderful things for them, which I will talk about a little bit later in the talk. So, out of all of these chemicals that plants have evolved, all of these toxins, caffeine is probably my favorite. Coffee is probably my favorite, but caffeine actually is in a lot of plants across the world that maybe we just don't eat because they're not as tasty as coffee or tea or chocolate. But yeah, yes, deathly coffee. Dose makes the poison. There are things like terpenes. So we have cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, cloves. When we combine these, what do we make? Pumpkin pie. Thank you, insects, for our pumpkin pie. So again, these are kind of bitter compounds. These are not things that we really, want to eat if we're an insect, but our human taste buds have sort of gotten used to them and co-opted them. And as a paleontologist, I also have to say, we need to thank mastodons for a pumpkin pie, because there have actually been pumpkin seeds found in the dung of mastodons. And so we think that during the Ice Age, mastodons helped keep pumpkins kind of going and help spread them. And so when you serve your pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving dinner, now you have a lot of things to annoy your family with. Let me tell you all about plant-insect coevolution and mastodons. You'll be so popular. Essential oils. So all of the oils that are in our perfumes, that are the mint in our toothpaste, lavender, eucalyptus, all of these things are actually insect defenses. And we have co-opted them because they smell great, but they're kind of astringent, In fact, I just put eucalyptus oil in my little humidifier at home. Thanks again to my toddler. Damn it, toddler. But it's something that now we associate as being like in the wellness industry. You just dab on a little bit of this essential oil and everything is cured, right? But if you're an insect, you're dead. So I always like that kind of juxtaposition of trying not to be eaten and trying to make this amazing toxin, and then humans are kind of woo-woo, lavender, it'll cure us all. The tannins in your wines, again in cocoa, in your chocolate, they really do give that kind of that nice, rich flavor that we enjoy. The flavonoids in a great IPA. This is actually my favorite brewery up in Michigan. So hops plants have these flavonoids that we use when brewing. They're not only in the hops, but also in the leaves. And one of the cool things that's actually housed in our museum downstairs right now that I'm working on is looking at fossil hops from a place called the Hell Creek Formation, which is in North Dakota. It's actually where our newest Teen Rex and our newest Triceratops, which if you haven't seen yet, stop by and see. It's in the Space Odyssey hallway being prepared. But the Hell Creek Formation is a late Cretaceous site we have about, I'm going to say 15,000 fossil leaves from this locale, or from this geologic formation. and we think we have the oldest fossil hops. So that's sort of one of the leaves. And what's really cool is they have these trichomes. Remember those hairs on the leaves? And they're glandular trichomes, and so they release a resin that probably has flavonoids. We've zapped it with lasers to try to see if we could get any of the chemistry, which the fossils are probably too old. And again, some of the chemistry might be released upon herbivory, and so maybe it's not in the plant all the time, and so we wouldn't necessarily detect it in the fossils themselves. But you can actually see these little beads of resin on the surface of these leaves. So we know that the Cretaceous Triceratops hops were bitter, just like they are today. Now, this is really nasty. Nicotine. Nicotine is another chemical that plants produce to stop insect herbivores, and humans have co-opted it, and is now addictive. And I will say, nobody here should smoke or you will all sound like me. Also, some illicit drugs. These are coca leaves that I had in Peru, but drugs like cocaine, other drugs like morphine or the active ingredient in aspirin, these are all things that plants evolved to stop insect herbivores from eating them, that we have co-opted for better or worse. Think about the spice trade in human history. We are literally moving spices across the globe. We are protecting caravans of spices from robbers. We're assigning value, huge amounts of value to these spices that human, histories are built upon. We are going into wars over access to spices in India and Africa and South America. We are going into wars over drugs today. These toxins are no joke in human society. We have huge international trade networks of different plants that have these toxins that we just somewhat like. So it's really baked into human society, these toxins and these chemicals that plants produce to not be eaten. I will say, not all toxins and anti-herbivore defenses are for insects, though. So, excuse me. One of the things that has kind of mixed reviews in the scientific community is capsaicin, or the things that make hot peppers hot. We not only select peppers and breed them to become more hot, so a lot of these are not natural, but we're not entirely sure if capsaicin evolved because it fends off insects particularly well. It seems to do better on mammals, and it seems to do really well on fungus. And so it might be that capsaicin evolved to prevent fungal rot in fruits, like these peppers. And so this is really where we get to the chemical paradox, right? Plants have evolved toxins for hundreds of millions of years to stop things from eating them. And we are like, excellent, bring it in, let's eat them all. We are wild about some of these toxins that the plants produce. But it's not quite a paradox, right? Because it's not like the plants aren't getting anything from it. So humans are now tending plants. We are taking care of plants that have these toxins that we love, and we're spreading them further than they would be naturally. And remember, plants are trying to just not be eaten, to grow, to reproduce. And so if we think about coffee in particular, the original coffee plants are from Ethiopia. There are a few species, and now we have grown them pretty much across the equatorial belt. And so these are just the 10 most prolific coffee producing countries, but coffee is grown all across the equatorial belt today. So in some ways, coffee is winning, right? It went from being a small plant in a forest in Ethiopia to now being distributed across the globe, being cared for. You know, let's think about natural selection again. Its fitness is really high because of its kind of mutualism with humans. So in a lot of ways, even though these chemicals were produced to stop herbivory, our herbivory is really, really beneficial. And I also want to say that we are not the only beneficiaries of these plant toxins. And so it's actually known that some plants will spike their nectar with a little bit of caffeine to help the pollinators. So what happens is this bee is drinking this nectar as a reward for pollination, getting all the pollen grains stuck to its legs, and what it's going to do is fly to the next plant, drink that nectar, exchange some of the pollen grains, and help that plant reproduce. So that plant's fitness increases. But what the caffeine does in little amounts is actually increase the bee's memory. And so what you want, European honeybees are kind of, they're non-native. Some in entomology call them invasive. They're not great at pollinating things in the US, right? Because they did not evolve here. And so they're kind of generalist pollinators. They'll visit a lot of different plants. But if you can kind of tweak their memory a little bit, they have a little bit more fidelity to remember to come back and visit your plant and maybe visit your neighboring plant, which might be the same species. And so if you can get a pollinator to kind of specialize a little bit more on your species, that means that your pollen grains have a much better chance of being introduced back into a flower and pollinated. And so really what the plant is doing is kind of like what coffee does for us. It's helping the bee increase its reproduction, increase its fitness by helping its memory just a little bit, which I think is really cool. So we're not the only animals that benefit from these kind of neurotoxins. And in fact, some might say that, while we're benefiting from them, the plants are really the winners here, right? Because they're literally controlling our bodies in little ways. But if you're like me, it's in a couple cups of little ways every day for the rest of my life. They are controlling us in subtle ways. They are around us. They are in our cabinets. They're in our medicine cabinets. They're in our pantries. The first thing we do is we brush our teeth. The last thing we do is maybe put on Vicks Vapor Rub if you're like me and dying up here. So they touch us in all of these little ways. And just like how plants and insects have been taking, or just like insects have been taking little bites, all day long, forever, for 417 million years, that really scales up, that adds up. But I think the influence of these anti-herbivore toxins on human societies have also done the same thing. It's just, death by 1,000 cuts. It's just an incredible diversity of the ways in which plant toxins have touched our lives and our human histories. So when you're walking through the botanic gardens or you're walking through the forests and you're thinking about how beautiful the world is around you and having a wonderful day, remember you're in the middle of a battlefield, right? These plants are not here just for for beauty. They are literally fighting for their lives. They're not just sitting there. They're producing chemicals. They're producing toxins. They can kill us if they want, and we're stupid enough to eat them. And we just need to kind of tweak how we see the world a little bit. Maybe drink a little bit more coffee and remember a little bit better how plants have really shaped our lives. Okay, with that, I want to thank you all for coming out early in the morning, or I guess it's not that early, but thank you for coming out on a Monday morning. I want to thank my collaborators for the research that we do here at the museum, and suggest a couple pieces of further reading if you're interested in the subject. I especially love this Most Delicious Poison book. It came out in 2022 by Noah Whiteman, and he has a great tagline, "From Spices to Vices." And I'd love to take any questions that you all might have.
Yeah, let's give it up for Gussie. If you have a question, you can feel free to raise your hand. I do ask that you speak into the queue because it is an accessibility need for people with hearing differences.
Thank you. I actually have two questions. The first one is, and I know on a geological time frame it's probably not important, but what do you think the impact of GMOs, especially in agriculture, have on this war, this battle? And then the second question is, what's your favorite story to tell about this when you're at your Thanksgiving dinner?
So the question of GMOs, that's a tough one. So basically, GMOs tend to, we produce them, genetically modified organisms for plants. We produce them because we want to limit herbivory on plants. And so we manipulate the genetics of plants, like there's GMO corn. That'll stop a lot of larval pests. And so in the, across the globe, GMOs are a problem for natural environments, I would say. Just like any monoculture is a problem for natural environments, you tend to get outbreaks of certain pests that normally wouldn't outbreak if you had a diverse ecosystem. And so I would say GMOs, play into the role of the coevolution. We do know that insects do kind of surpass our GMOs. Like GMO corn we have to constantly tweak it. But that's a tough one because it's kind of novel in agroecosystems today. So I would say it's a tough one, really. But coming from a school that had a really strong entomology agro department at University of Maryland, I will say that it was cool to see how insects took 20 years sometimes to be able to surpass the GMO defenses. And in that 20 years, that's 20 years of spraying fewer pesticides on our lands. And so while GMOs get a really bad rap, there are a lot of things to take into consideration about whether we want them. Just like GMO rice tends to actually add nutrients to rice, so that can be a great thing for a lot of countries that have food insecurity. So it's, but we also want to make sure that it's healthy for all of us humans, and we want to take care of our ecosystems. So I would say we're probably not doing a good job of any of that, but we'll see. And then my favorite story at, say, a Thanksgiving dinner, in terms of plant toxins, I guess it would probably be pumpkin pie. That's the best one. So many of the spices in our PSL, or pumpkin spice lattes are actually, anti-herbivore defenses. I will say I have one more really bad Thanksgiving or Halloween party question that you can put out to your frenemies, and that's thinking about, this is somewhat tangential, but thinking about the types of plants that we have on Earth today. So we have our flowering plants, and that's 94% of all plant species today. And we have our conifers, and we have our ferns and things like that, which are conifers, ferns, not flowering plants. And I always ask people, what are the plants that we eat that are not flowering plants? Can anybody think of any?
Acorns?
Acorns are flowering plants. This is a really tough question. There aren't many answers.
Oh, that's a good one.
Mushrooms are a fungus.
Oh.
Pine nuts. There you go. Pine nuts are from a gymnosperm or conifer.
In case you didn't hear that, pine nuts was the answer.
Pine nuts, but also fiddlehead ferns. I once had a pickled fiddlehead fern on a Bloody Mary, and it was very cool. And then if you are an alcohol drinker, gin.
Oh.
Gin has juniper berries. Also, sometimes they make like spruce tip beers. That was a fad. I think they went too far. But so, anyway, long story short, it's kind of a fun question. And then you get to look at your spread and think about all the things that are flowering plants, from wheat to pumpkins to, basically every ingredient that's plant-based on your Thanksgiving table is going to be some sort of flowering plant. So you can really annoy your family again with that one.
Any other questions? Yeah, if you'd like to go there.
Sorry, I don't mean to monopolize. I did have an observation. I noticed that you had the hops from 67 million years ago, and I'm wondering if it was really the asteroid that killed those dinosaurs, and maybe they were just all boozed up with beer.
You know what? I'll take that back to my colleagues. We have a big National Science Foundation grant looking at the KPG, the Cretaceous Paleogene Mass Extinction Event, but I think we're moving in a good direction now. We used to think it was a series of volcanic eruptions in the Deccan Traps, and then it was an asteroid, but really it's some like gnarly IPAs.
I would like to thank you all for coming out here and supporting Gussie as well as the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Let's give it up for Gussie one last time.
Thanks, everybody.
Just a reminder, any feedback is greatly appreciated. I'll be out there, as well as once you exit, you can head left through Space Odyssey, take a minute to look at the museum, or just head out the north doors if you're ready to leave. Thank you all so much.
And we have a great coffee lab. Thank you.
I'll come back and check in with you, but I'll go there first. But feel free to pack up and...
Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming.